I don't know about you, but I really don't want to get on the wrong side of these gentlemen. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics focused 40k channel, where we're all about finding stronger ways to use our armies on the tabletops of the 41st millennium. We've been having a look at a few of the unique units from the Dark Angels, and it's time to take a look at the Deathwing Knights, the grim and monastic Terminators, armed with some frankly enormous maces, all ready to beat some heretics into redemption. In the video we'll take a look at their datasheet, any obvious buffs, synergies and stratagems, and how I would personally use them in a game of 40k. Now, in the background, the Death Company are the Dark Angels' first company, and admission to the Deathwing is often the gateway to the admission to the inner circle of the Dark Angels, where they begin to learn the terrible truths of the Dark Angels' past. Clad in their bone-coloured Terminator armour, the Deathwing are one of the most prestiged Terminator formations in the entire galaxy, serving as powerful and elite warriors within the Dark Angels, but also delivering an armoured fist to whenever one of the fallen may raise their treacherous heads. The Deathwing Knights are an elite cadre of this already elite formation, a higher circle within the already exclusive Order of the Deathwing. They embody the silent and stoic strength that L. Johnson himself was said to exhibit, and wield their powerful maces of absolution to the detriment of all who get in their way. Very scary all in all, but let's see what these guys can do on the tabletop. So the Deathwing Knights are a elite's choice for Codex Dark Angels. In the squad you get 5 Knights, including a Knight Master. The regular Knights are armed with maces of absolution, and the Knight Master is armed with a flail of the unforgiven. They cost 37 points per model, meaning that a typical 5-man squad will set you back 185 points, and you can choose to include up to another 5 additional Deathwing Knights, so up to a full 10-man squad. As well as their signature war gear, they're also equipped with a Storm Shield each, meaning that they're very hard to shift. They have movement of 5, weapon skill and ballistic skill of 3 up, strength and toughness of 4, 2 wounds and 2 attacks, leadership 8 and a 2-up save. The Knight Master instead has 3 attacks, and leadership 9 instead, and of course all of them have that very nice 3+ invulnerable save, provided with the Storm Shield, so not so dissimilar from Terminator Assault Squads then. Fighty war gear and Storm Shields on a Terminator platform. The Maces of Absolution also aren't so dissimilar from Thunderhammers. They are strength times 2, AP -2 and damage 3, so a little bit worse AP, but unlike the Thunderhammer you do not suffer the -1 to hit penalty when you're attacking your target with this weapon. This will mean that in general they're better against anything that has a 4-up save or worse, or anything that has a strong invulnerable save, but worse against anything with a 2-up save without a good invul, such as say Land Raiders or other Terminators. Instead of a Mace of Absolution, the Squad Sergeant, the Knight Master, is armed with that Flail of the Unforgiven. This is a Strength +2, AP -3, Damage 2 power weapon, with the special rule that if you do inflict damage with this weapon, say on a 1-wound infantry squad, the excess damage isn't lost, and you keep on allocated damage to that target unit until either all damage is lost or the target unit is destroyed. This means that it is basically double as effective as it would normally be against 1-wound infantry. With Shock Assault, if he rolls well, the Knight Master could potentially kill 8 1-wound infantry with this per turn. It's a really good all-round weapon that makes the squad decently stronger against hordes, but will also have something nasty to do to enemy heavy hitters as well, though it might not be quite as strong as the Mace of Absolution against the toughest of targets. The squad has just one war gear option, which is whether or not to be accompanied by a Watcher in the Dark. The mysterious little robed figures that often follow around the Dark Angels, they typically enjoy carrying around fancy bits of war gear. He will cost you 5 points, and once per game, if an enemy psychic power affects a unit of Deathwing Knights that's accompanied by this guy, roll a dice, and on a 3+ the power has no effect on the unit, and then you remove the Watcher in the Dark. So essentially it's a once per game dispel power. It goes off on a 3-up, and could maybe save the squad from some mortal wounds or a powerful psychic debuff. There are definitely some times when this is going to be absolutely massive and it could pay for itself many times over, but against a lot of opponents you might not even get targeted by any psychic powers, so he could be a complete waste of points. For me he's a little bit situational, but he is quite cheap, so honestly I could go either way with this guy. Feel free to include him if you want to and if you've got him painted up, if not then no big deal. Aside from this guy, the squad has a few special rules. Their Inner Circle special rule will mean that they also pass morale tests. They have combat doctrines, which aren't going to get them much help in shooting as they can't shoot anything. But if you do ever get to Assault Doctrine, could ramp up the AP a little bit, essentially making those Maces of Absolution into flat better Thunderhammers. We also mentioned that they had Shock Assault earlier, meaning that your standard knights will be having 3 attacks on the charge, and your Knight Master will be up to 4. That's a lot of very quality attacks coming in from a big unit of these guys. Aside from that, they can combat squad as per normal for Space Marine units if you have 10 of them, and they can also teleport strike in as per all Terminators, starting greater than 9 inches from the enemy, although you can make that closer with one of those stratagems from Ritual of the Damned, which we'll mention in a bit. So overall, the Deathwing Knights are a very powerful melee unit with a really strong damage output and pretty decent survivability to boot. They're probably going to be best used teleporting down from Deep Strike and attempting to make a charge into the enemy lines and getting to grips with whatever heavy hitters the foe has to offer and giving them a righteous death with a big mace. So let's see what other things we can do to make them perform even more on the table. Firstly, let's talk about character support. Naturally, any of your reroll buffs will certainly help out these guys, whether it's Masters or Lieutenants rerolling 1s, or someone like Azrael or Belial, giving them full rerolls to hit. Belial in particular is a very cheap source of deep striking rerolls, and you'll have a very good time running along with these guys. In addition to this, Chaplains are also a great combo with the Deathwing, particularly if you already started Chaplain on the board and pop the +2 to charges litany. They'll be making a charge on a 7 rather than a 9, which is a massive increase to their likelihood of success, particularly if you combine that with a cheeky command reroll. These guys aren't going to be doing anything good for your army unless they're smashing the enemy to bits, so allowing them to get into close combat is a really big deal. As well as this, the Deathwing Ancient can give these guys +1 attack, which is really quite nice, and a very solid buff for how cheap he is. Finally, the Deathwing Apothecary has the potential to bring back some slain models from the Deathwing squad too, though I find he's a little bit more situational than buffs that just go off all the time. Finally, if you set them up next to a Ravenwing Darkshroud, then having -1 to hit can really go a long way to keeping these guys alive from enemy shooting, and will make the unit very hard to shift indeed. Darkshrouds are just pretty solid durability boosts for the Dark Angels in general. Also, one important power for the Dark Angels is Righteous Repugnance. It's a warp charge 7 that the Psyker has to be quite close to them, but will allow you the insane bonus of rerolling all failed hit and wound rolls made for the unit's melee weapons until the start of your next psychic phase. These will absolutely put your Deathwing Knights into rage mode. There's frankly very little in the entire game that's going to stand up to a full squad of Deathwing Knights going hammer and tongs with this power off with those maces of absolution. Moving on to relics and warlord traits now. Firstly, we have Fury of the Lion, a warlord trait where when your warlord charges alongside a unit like the Deathwing Knights, you can add 1 to their strength. Because of the way that the modifiers work, this will mean that they'll be striking at strength 10 with those maces of absolution and strength 7 with that big flail. That's a very important bracket to get over, as it means that you'll be wounding toughness 8 vehicles on 3s, which is a nice benefit indeed, and I'm sure your Blood Angels counterparts will tell you about it. It does require a little bit of setup though, and you're not going to get anything out of it unless your Warlord makes the charge too, so it isn't really the easiest buff to pull off. Another very good one from the main book is Master of Maneuver, which allows you to reroll how far Dark Angels units within 6 inches can advance and charge. Having a full reroll to charges is absolutely amazing. As I said, we really can't afford for these guys to just deep strike in and sit there and do nothing for a turn and then get shot in the face by all the enemy's army. They really want to be coming down, breaking something that turn, and tying up a lot of stuff in close combat. In terms of the warlord traits from Ritual of the Damned, we have Lalo the Mighty. This is a 6-inch aura where the Deathwing nearby your warlord can reroll wound rolls against characters or models with 8 wounds or more. Honestly, for the most part, the Deathwing Knights are going to be absolutely fine against infantry of all stripes, so flat rerolls to wound against these 2 important niches can really put them through the roof. It is a little bit annoying, that restriction on targets, but I think that they could get a good amount of value out of this, and it could be one that you could buy in through Hero of the Chapter if you can see that your opponent's list has a ton of vehicles or knights or something in it. From the relic section of Ritual of the Damned, we also have Pennant of Remembrance. This is a special standard for the Deathwing Ancient carry, and it'll give models within 6 inches that are Deathwing a 5+ Feel No Pain save. Now this is quite restrictive because it's models, not units, so you really do have to cluster up quite close to this guy to be able to get the durability boost. It's not going to mesh very well with these guys getting into close combat, as you will definitely need your banner bearer charging alongside you, and one or both of you might fail that charge. If you can make the positioning work though, having that Deathwing Ancient provide the buffs of +1 attack and a 5+ Feel No Pain would make him a very valuable character point for point. Terminators and 2 wound models absolutely love a 5+ Ignore Wounds save. It's just not the easiest to use in an actual game, to be honest. Moving on to stratagems now. From the main codex, there's the Hunt the Fallen stratagem, where you could give your Deathwing full rerolls to hit against a certain infantry character. Maybe if your opponent had someone who was a very big target, such as Abaddon or something, then giving full rerolls to hit against him could help end his life early. Honor the Chapter is certainly one to consider with Deathwing Knight squads of all sizes. With 3 command points, even a minimum sized squad will be spitting out another 12 Thunderhammer equivalent attacks, plus that Flail of the Unforgiven. If all that translates into another dead key enemy threat that they would be able to use next turn to good effect, then it's absolutely worth spending those CP, and this only gets better of course if you're taking a really enormous unit of Deathwing Knights. Fortress of Shields is a great durability boost for your knights in close combat. You use this at the start of the fight phase, and your opponent's attacks must subtract 1 to wound when you're targeting the Deathwing Knights. If you really are in combat with something that legitimately threatens them, then this is a very cheap way to give them a good durability boost, and is usually going to be the same or better value than Transhuman Physiology, though Transhuman Physiology will do better against Strength 8 attacks, but it does cost twice as many CP. If you are fighting a scary melee threat, then this is a really good value stratagem. From Ritual of the Damned, we've gained a ton more stratagem options, such as the aforementioned Transhuman Physiology. 2 CPs never be wounded stronger than a 4+. It's great on tanky Strength 4 models that might well be hit by anti-tank weapons or Night Stomps or something. It's good that you have 2 different durability options, although the first Dark Angel specific one is locked to close combat. Fury of the First is a cheap and effective damage buff. 1 command point to add 1 to hit rolls will give you a 25% damage increase from the squad's output. As we've already said, this squad can potentially be very big, and even at its minimum size it's pretty powerful. So this could well be a very easy way to ramp up the damage and make sure they delete the threats that they need to. Could also be a good one to combine with Honor the Chapter. You could have a full 10-man squad, hit on 2s and then fight twice, with the Maces of Absolution alone. That little combo will very easily down you 2 Imperial Knights. These guys really do have powerful damage output when you invest in them just a little bit more. As for unique Deathwing stratagems from the book, firstly we have Outnumbered but Never Outmatched, which you can use when you're in combat with an enemy unit with 10 models or more, and it just adds +1 to their attacks characteristic. Typically this will be a bigger increase in damage output than Fury of the First will be against that target. It'll be a 33% damage increase rather than a 25%. And of course you can stack both of them, so you get the extra attacks and also hit on 2s. Not bad for 1 command point. We also have Combined Assault for 2 CP. Now this is a really powerful one that really ups the viability of dedicated Assault Deathwing units. This is the 2 command point one that allows you to set up a Deathwing squad coming in from Deep Strike Reserve anywhere within 6 inches of a Ravenwing squad, and unlike normal when coming in from Reserve, you only have to set up 6 inches away from an enemy unit rather than the usual 9, meaning that you'll only need a 6-inch charge, which will happen 73% of the time, and even more reliably if you think about using a command reroll for it. Now this one is a super reliable delivery mechanism and also fits the fluff quite well of the 2 wings working together in synergy, and it can allow them to deep strike in areas that they wouldn't have previously been able to, and declare charges that might have been too far back due to the 12 inches charge declaration rule. I'd say this one is a really solid one to plan to use if you are taking a big unit of Deathwing Knights and you do have a fair amount of Ravenwing units on the table. Finally, we have another durability boost stratagem, which is Stand Firm. For 1 command point, you can add +1 to their toughness characteristic when the Deathwing Knights are chosen to be a target of an attack either in the shooting or fight phases. Now this one's a touch more situational than the Shield Wall stratagem from the main codex, as there are only some brackets that going up from toughness 4 to toughness 5 will affect against. For example, if the majority of the enemy attacks are strength 6 and 7, then this stratagem won't actually make any difference. Some things it will though, and you could also potentially combine this with the -1 to wound Shield Wall, meaning that strength 5 attacks that would have been wounding on 3s are now only wounding on 5s. So the potential of a fun combo there. So plenty of stratagem options, but let's talk about how I'd use them in a game of actual 40k. So in terms of squad composition, I think I could happily run anything from a min-size unit to a max-size unit, depending on whether you want these guys to be a small and focused punch, or if you want them to be a massive battle line unit that's going to deal the entire enemy army a body blow, and you're going to invest a fair amount of stratagems or character buffs in getting them to do what they do best. I could go either way on taking the Watcher in the dark. I would probably throw it in if I was using it in the second formation, a really big squad, as you really don't want a 10-man Deathwing Knight squad being undone by a powerful debuff psychic power, if you could have prevented it for 5 points. Depending on the opponent, I would usually start them in Deep Strike, but not against literally everyone, particularly against armies that could fan out and control the entire board, giving you nowhere decent to Deep Strike, or against armies that you're pretty sure are going to be rushing up and getting in your face with scary close combat units turn 1, meaning that having these guys as a massive counter-attack threat is going to cause big problems for your opponent, particularly things like Alpha Strike Space Marine armies such as Blood Angels are ones that it might be better to just start on the board and counter-attack those Blood Angels to hit them with maces. I'd have a good think about what sort of character buffs I wanted to include with them. Certainly if I was using a massive unit of them, we'd want some sort of rerolls in there. Belial is a really good shout for this. He's cheap and gives 4 rerolls as well as being a decently fighty character in himself. I'd also be very tempted by the Librarian with Righteous Repugnance, as flat rerolling all hits and wounds is absolutely mad. Finally, I'd also want some way of pretty much guaranteeing that they're going to get into close combat on the turn that they drop if I was putting them in Deep Strike. So that would require a Chaplain for the +2 inches to charge, the Warlord trait Master of Maneuver to reroll those charges, or the command points and units available to do the Combined Strike where we set them up next to a Ravenwing Biker unit. All of them are very solid options for getting the Knights where they need to be, and which one you choose probably depends on the rest of your list. In terms of Deep Striking, you'd have to weigh up whether you're coming in turn 2 or turn 3. Generally, the earlier that you can get to the enemy to deal damage to them, the better, but if you need another turn to blow away enemy screens, to expose the core of the enemy army so the Deathwing Knights can come and take it out in one fell swoop, then that could also be an option. When you drop, it's best to land in cover if you can. If Overwatch is an issue, then deploying out of line of sight is always helpful. Say if you could drop behind some ruined walls, then there's nothing wrong with that. And then you'd want to be trying to make contact with the enemy, strongly thinking about using any of their excellent offensive and defensive stratagems, such as fighting twice, +1 to hit, making them harder to wound, that sort of thing. And I'd try and think about where the unit is going to wind up at the end of combat, whether it's annoyingly tying up some enemy firepower, winding them up in cover or out of line of sight of other enemy gunline elements, or if at all possible, trying to wrap and trap a luckless enemy infantry model so the entire squad can't be shot next turn, and in your opponent's turn you can get to work on that next infantry squad with their maces of absolution. If I was starting them on the board, I'd want them to be pretty front and central, as they have very slow movement, and if you put them out on the flank somewhere isolated, your opponent could just go nowhere near them all game. Focus on wiping out the rest of your army, and then turn their attention to the Knights who won't make combat when you've essentially already lost the game. If you can't charge turn 1, certainly be moving and advancing. A big solid shield wall of Deathwing Knights is going to be a very scary threat that the opponent's not going to want to go anywhere near to, and you can use that scary threat in the same way that guard players use Bullgryns to dominate the centre of the field, and allow your other marines better places to manoeuvre around. In this one, I'd certainly consider thinking about prepared positions or transhuman physiology if you do feel they're just about to take an absolute crap ton of damage in the shooting phase. You are probably going to be a bit more limited with what you can charge if you start them on the board, but your opponent will pay for that in having to keep away from them and give up the centre of the board, hopefully. Overall, I think that the Deathwing Knights are a very solid unit, if perhaps a little one-dimensional, in that close combat is all they can do, and they aren't exactly the fastest at getting there either. I'd use them as a massive armoured punch to take the heart out of the enemy army, and give your opponent a threat that they can't ignore. I'm hoping with those new stratagems and Deathwing options through Vigil of the Damned, we'll see a few more of these guys on the tabletop, as their miniatures are absolutely beautiful, and they do have some really interesting war gear and stats in-game. If there's anything obvious that I've missed with the Deathwing Knights, please let me know down in the comments below. I will be trying to do a few more Dark Angels tactics reviews in the next week or so. Hopefully we'll have the Ravenwing Talon Master coming out next. That one should be coming out next Tuesday, if my schedule goes according to plan. Let me know if there's any other Dark Angels units that you'd like me to cover. They're certainly an interesting codex, and their options have certainly expanded with Ritual of the Damned. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you've been enjoying videos like this, and if you don't want to miss any other Dark Angels content, I have new 40k videos coming out every day. Also feel free to support me on Patreon, the link is down in the description below, as making all of these videos does take quite a bit of time. And of course a big thank you to those of you who have already pledged your support. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.